Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. Just a couple things to note before we get into today's show. If Real Talk has impacted you, we would love if you would take a minute and leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. This is a huge help for us in promoting Real Talk to those who have never listened. And, as always, today's episode is brought to you by our official sponsor, Trivan, builders of custom trucks, trailers, and enclosure buildings tailored to your needs. Be sure to check them out at www.trivan.com. A huge thanks to them for making this conversation possible. Now on to today's episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Real Talk podcast. Today it is Lucas here hosting, but also I have Tyler back in the saddle as well, joining as kind of a host slash guest for this podcast. And we have some familiar faces, of course. Just below me on the screen here, we have David Visser and Kyle Vasas from Faith to Film. So thanks for joining us, guys. Yeah, it's going to be a fun one today. So we'll jump right into it. We are talking about AI and what it means for us as Christians, what it means for us at work, school, church, all of that good stuff. And we hope that we can provide some insight on what's going on if you're not too familiar, and also encourage you to engage with this, but to do so, just trusting God's plan for the rollout of this latest iteration of technology and for finding a way to responsibly use it for His glory. So without further ado, we probably should start by defining a few terms. So you might hear things like large language model being thrown around, or even just AI itself. And maybe I'll throw to you, David, for a quick primer. Can you explain to us what is AI fundamentally, and then how does a large language model play into that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And now AI is a little bit interesting as a term because it has been around for a while, and depending on your definition, it's like we've had it either longer, less long, or some would say not even really totally yet, right? What does it mean for a computer to be intelligent? But essentially, it's just computing that can have reason, that can actually learn in such a way that is similar to human intelligence. And so for that, where we get this massive increase that we've seen is from that artificial intelligence, that work that's being done to make computers more like the human brain, seeing leaps and bounds moving forward. And so one of the terms is machine learning, which is a subsection of artificial intelligence. Subsection of that is the new big thing, the reason why all of this is happening, which is something called deep learning. And through deep learning, inside of that as a subcategory, we have generative AI. And generative AI is where you have LLMs, right? Generative AI and LLMs are the big talk today. These are the things that have gotten out of the realm of like non-consumer research-based information, and now the whole world is being taken over. And so it's kind of the categories that take us down. Generative AI being a system that allows a computer to learn using massive data sets to generate text, images, or video based on patterns that it learns over time. And so it's very different algorithms. Essentially, deep learning, the big thing with it is that we have logical structures based on the human brain instead of logical structures based on just if-then statements from computers. That means that it kind of works like our own brain. It kind of thinks how we do in as complicated of a way that overlaps itself quite a lot, that can make decisions, get from point A to point B in a way that we haven't been able to before, that we can't track even. And so it'll make decisions as kind of practically as we can think of that term for computers as it can. And so generative AI is creating these things using patterns that it recognizes. It takes millions of photos of a puppy and then takes those photos, analyzes them, and then is able to generate a totally new photo based on the information that it's gathered from the last one. So it can collect data and then use it in new, interesting ways. Large language models being beside that is the form of that is focused solely on text and how that can be connected to specifically human-like text output. if that helps. But that's a lot there. But so let me know what you guys.
Yeah, no, no, that's a great primer. Hopefully that helps if people are listening and they're not super familiar, if that helps set the stage, how it's different from the previous iteration of computer um, code and learning into this kind of next level that we're seeing today, which is again, like you say, a lot more similar to how we think as human beings, where we can stack logic on top of each other and get really creative with different solutions. So with that, Kyle, I want to throw to you. So, with Ty and I in our business, and Ty in particular, he takes this role on every day is looking at different ways that AI impacts construction and what that means for us in doors and hardware. But you guys exist in the media space as well, and obviously, again, speaking about generative AI, that has a huge impact on media in terms of ethics, in terms of what you can create, licensing different content, all that kind of good stuff. So, what are some of the ways that you've seen AI roll out, let's say, over the last 5 to 10 years in your time in media, and what does that mean for the media space at large?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's impacted us greatly, and it's something that we're having to stay on top of constantly because it seems to change each day. But for sure, the biggest thing, as far as yeah, AI's kind of always been around with classical computing, but now we have this deep learning, and the thing that impacts us the greatest in media is the generative AI, right? Like images being produced. What does that mean for someone who's a graphic designer? You know, even just writing scripts and using LLMs to create those scripts, you know, how does that impact our workflows? It's a part of everything we do, and we're always looking for what's it going to be like a year from now, what's it going to be like 6 months from now, what's this new video generation model that came out, and is this better than our current workflows in Blender where we're doing a lot of things more manually. And so it's definitely interesting to see the way it is changing and the way it's progressing, and it's because it's happening so fast, it's even hard to like fully wrap your head around like what it is and how to use it because it's changing so much. But yeah, it's had a great impact. Even like all the animations we're doing with Fate the Film, AI is playing a role in that workflow. So like just creating the base images, and then there's a lot of hand drawn elements and animating that goes into it. But yeah, there's a lot of generation that comes from AI.
Do you feel like it's an edge to what you guys do? Like it helps to improve your productivity, but there's still that baseline human creativity there still?
Yeah, I think it's necessary to learn how to integrate it to stay ahead and have that edge, because if you don't learn to integrate it, you're just going to get left behind from people who are integrating it. And there's always going to be that human element, right? So it's less about who's the most creative, but who's able to implement AI to continue to be creative, right? And so that's what we're always trying to do.
Yeah, it really hasn't taken over any end result positions. It's always the initial things that we do. It's taking over those jobs to drive us to the end product a lot faster. And so a good example is like graphic art, and like graphic artists in general are having this. We used to say I design a logo for a client, and but the client wants 10 different logos. Um, as options, because why would you want to just look at one? I'm not going to just design one and send it to him. He needs a bunch of options. AI being massive for this, that I can just generate 50 for him pretty quick, and he has a rough idea to then get to pick which one you start liking the most, and that can happen in minutes instead of spending days. It used to be that the majority of the time on a logo was on those various versions to give them some kind of options, right? You're starting from scratch a bunch. Instead, it's done in 5 minutes. They get 50 to pick from, and now you take that generation that obviously needs development. You need to now take it into Photoshop and make a version of it with layers and adjustability and, you know, higher resolution and the tiny adjustments that you want to make, turn it into a vector, whatever the case. And so it's not taking that end result, but it is making all of the job a lot faster.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we saw the path of this. Like, were you guys surprised at how the generative AI kind of emerging, um, what kind of roles it took on? Because I think the general idea used to be before this whole generative AI thing, and large language models became something that was generally used. Like people can just use it online, Chat GPT and Gemini and all these things. I think people assume that AI would take over for blue collar, like they would take over, like we saw robots taking over in like a Ford plant. It would do the similar thing, like it would learn to swing a hammer. It would learn to, because it seems easier to program. And what we saw was a lot more like creative jobs being taken over, and it's generating like images and logos, like you're saying. Like, were you guys surprised at that? And then like, have you seen like what's the challenges there for people who weren't really expecting this to come in and take their jobs over, um, or even the tasks? Like,
I would say the first time I saw generative AI was like 3 4 years ago or something. We were filming at Summit actually, and David showed me Dolly 2, where you put in a prompt and out came an image.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, it was shocking when I first saw it, where it was just like, this is what it is now. What's it going to be 5 years from now? It hasn't been underwhelming to this point, the way it's developed. Like, it's pretty incredible what image generation is doing, and now video generation. And so what you're seeing now with videos, applying the progress that we've seen in image generation in the last 5 years to video, it's mind-boggling to think of like what video AI generation is going to be. And so yeah, it was definitely surprising.
There's also the corporate angle of where corporations are using AI compared to consumer, and we tend to know more about consumer, and we're all playing around with image generation because that's the fun consumer option to be doing. The reality is, I think I saw a statistic that 73% of IT positions have been heavily affected by AI, and finance as well, something in the high 60% is heavily affected by AI. The reason why we're not seeing the blue collar stuff, which is also what I would think naturally right away, oh man, everything's going to be run in manufacturing plants by these robots. It's actually the robotics that are now lagging behind. But that's why we're seeing such a surge of that also growing alongside it, because before the bottleneck was in computing power, in analytics for robotics, in creating basically AI systems to allow them to run and do complicated things. That was the bottleneck before, and now the bottleneck is the hardware, the actual making of the robots. And as we see that, including in manufacturing plants, I think now we're going to start seeing that catch up. I could see how that'll be very influential in those sectors, but it doesn't seem like it's there yet compared to the other realms.
Mhm.
Tyler, you mentioned you're using it in your business. What does that look like kind of practically?
yeah, a lot of what we're currently using is a little bit more on the computer learning side. So it's still early AI. Like it's not this generative stuff. But we're starting to get into like researching for large language model stuff. So like, how can you feed it a professional in our industry or any industry? Like, how can you feed it a professional's brain and then use that instead of hiring a professional? So you would say like the most educated person in your field puts their brain into a large language model or into an AI chip, and then you're able to mine that data in any way you can imagine. And so if you could do that at scale, you could have like corporate lawyers, for instance, like just have AI have an agent watching them and seeing how they make decisions and even making inferences beyond what the professional is able to do. And then having that entire suite of knowledge along with, say, something like ChatGPT, a large language model, like database of knowledge, and even feeding in things like building codes and having it read like court documents or like court proceedings and understanding how arguments are made. And like you can do tons of things with that, and then it will basically be a professional you can consult with without having to hire the person. And so like it's like pennies on the dollar, and that's probably even understating it. It's pennies on hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can then utilize. So we're using that in our we're starting to look into using it. But yeah, it's like it's kind of like you said, Dave. It's like you're corporately like it's just the use cases are unbelievable, and the value generation there is just it's crazy. It's crazy.
That's a crazy thought to take basically the mind of someone who's an expert in that industry. You could take the CEO of some company and implement that, and then that person in the form of AI is running that company with all the additional information it has from all the different databases.
Yeah. And I think people misunderstand this a little bit. Like, so maybe you guys can help explain this, but like a large language model that we see now, like a ChatGPT, runs on the data that it's fed, which is a lot of it's just internet based, right? But there's other layers to this that people I don't know that they understand is possible. Where what you're talking about with deep learning, you can actually train these things, and so it seems hard to train ChatGPT because the database is so big. And so if it makes a mistake, it's likely if you test it over and over, it'll continue to make that mistake. And so you think it's like, it's not that smart. It doesn't learn that fast. But if you orient these things correctly and you're using the models correctly, they actually learn surprisingly quick. And so like you have something like a case, a case in like a court of law, whatever, it will recommend an argument. It might not be great, but if you model your AI like processors properly, it'll actually learn like faster than like a trainee would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
for
so
sure.
a good example of that in the generative world for us is I can take a bunch of photos of my face and then give it to what we use is Leonardo.ai, and I give it to Leonardo and it'll take those photos. The more photos I give it, the more it can learn. And then instantly, as soon as I put that in, now it knows who David is. And I give it the description. These are photos of David. And it goes, great. Now I know this is David. And then when I ask for a photo of David looking like a king, then it can put that out and actually generate it based on the information that I gave it. Like that fast, it can learn. The part of the trick is the ones who own these AI bots are also wanting to control what it's learning, right? And so the data that it's collecting over time, it's not that I can just teach it whatever I want, and tell it what's right and what's wrong, and now it'll constantly believe that. It will in the scope of that single conversation you're having, because you can tell it, stop having this opinion, actually have the opinion of a Christian instead of a view of evolution that you're currently spitting at me. You can have that for that conversation, but you're not teaching it and telling it, well, actually, this isn't true. Now go tell everybody this information, right? We don't have access to teach it in that same way, but it does learn as it's developing. And so when we're talking about those specific bots, designing for very specific causes, I want this for my construction job and for it to act just as this person and continue to act as this person. What we're actually doing is limiting it, not adding information. We might be adding some stuff about our job, but the biggest aspect is taking out all of the noise, right? I might tell it, I want you to be a Christian and only ever be a Christian when you talk to me and have a Christian's perspective. I want you to eliminate the viewpoints of everything else and just have that. And so it's narrowing in these more micro LLMs. That's what's getting popular inside of small businesses.
When you talk about exploring it with your company, is that exploring creating your own LLM, or there's already companies out there that are kind of offering this service that kind of fits your needs? Or
Yeah, no, I mean construction's notoriously slow to everything, so we're barely over the PDF hump. So it's
so when you say exploring, it's you doing research, being like, guys, we should use LLMs to do this, or is it actually like finding its way into construction? People are using.
No, I haven't seen it anywhere in my world, but like these guys don't have time for that. But that's yeah, we're more or less exploring it from the base level. But yeah, I see it in a lot of other applications, and I'm like, oh well, if I fed it this information, and like you're saying, like if you start a chat in ChatGPT, eventually you can train that chat, that specific conversation enough where you can get useful data out of it. But doing that on a model level where like you take it and then it becomes who you are, or who you need it to be. And you see that with like things like AI agents. So if you chat with, say, like now the CRA actually has one. I just noticed the other day. You can chat with the CRA agent. And so like that used to be like very base level computing. Like if this, then this, right? Like if you ask me for your account balance at your bank, you get this number because we just route it to there, we find it and we give it back. But now it's more like if I were to have a mortgage and I want to like refinance and this and this and this, they're like, oh, I need this kind of information from you, and here's who you should go talk to. Like it's way smarter. And then like a bank or the government or whatever would control the information that it is trying to pull from, I guess. So it's not giving you like United States data. It might be giving you like Alberta specific data, which is
Yeah. And it's even an interesting one would be applying it to like generating quotes for people, right? It could have that conversation, collect all the details, all the data and those market prices of everything and the labor costs of everything, and can provide very comprehensive quotes for people, and they can just have a conversation with someone and get like a pretty thorough quote on whatever project they're working on.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Yeah, so that's actually a great example on the kind of technical differences between how we would be computing compared to deep learning, and how artificial neural networks are different, right? And so, just like you said, if then statements was how those bots were made. It's if you said this, then you do that. And the big thing with that is that the beginning, if you know the beginning result and the end result as a computer engineer, you'll be able to track and tell the path that it took to get from A to B, right? Because we've given it those rules. If this, then do that. If this, then do that. Systems branching out. Now, what we instead have is a point A and a point B. But instead of having the pathways if then statements, imagine it like a grid where you have just points everywhere, and it can go up, down, back and forth in any direction that it decides. And if you put it in 3 times over, it'll possibly make different decisions along the way to get from A to B. And so that's the crazy part, that these neural pathways, just like how our minds work, that there's a lot that goes into it. And it's not just a lot more if then statements. It can actually cross over in ways and get from A to B in a way that we can't track. We can't necessarily know. A master computer engineer can't go in and just say, oh, this is the path that it took to get to here, and this is what it would do if you asked it to do this question.
Yeah, that's a huge change in how we think about these things too, right? Because a lot of people who aren't in this space would think along the lines of general computing. It's like a calculator. You put in an equation, it calculates it, and it knows how to do that. And we assume that when you ask ChatGPT something, it's coming up with a result. But like if you ask it again and again and again and again, you get all different things, and you're like, well, I don't understand like how a computer can do that. And so like having the different like we hear about AI development where they leave an AI computer working on a problem all night. Like, so that in the morning, they have a collection of like possible solutions to something, which makes no sense to us because you're like, if I type in a word in Google, it just shows up on my screen. Like that's how computers work, but that's not how they work anymore. And so like even the architecture of the chips that go inside your computer is different now. It doesn't, it works like it's pinging off these, like the neurons in your brain, it pings off wherever it feels like, and it's bringing in memories that might be stronger or weaker. And if you prompt it to do it over and over, it'll take different routes. So that's like it's something where it's hard to explain to somebody, how that's going to change the world's like computing, because I mean, we all don't really understand yet. But it's something that's a completely different way of solving a problem with a bunch
So
of
just a quick
wires
question,
soldered
just to drill
together.
down on that, what allows it to do that jumping in between? That's what I don't fully understand yet. Maybe you can explain that, Dave. If like to go from A to B, but then take a completely different path, you may it sounded like you said you can't even track what the path is in between.
Yeah, that's right. And so it does have to do with now, past this term that I have for you guys, we get into incredibly complex situations. The invention of this, the creation of this system is nuts and would take a long time to explain and much past my pay grade. But the idea is that because learning has gone from this algorithmic system of if then statements, learning and growing, recognizing patterns, we now have actual brain-like logical structures. And how that works is through these artificial neural networks that they've designed, which basically, the interesting thing is that it's kind of multi-layered systems from A to B in their system, that it has to go through all of these sections that are overlapping each other as well, to then get to different solutions, get to different possibilities in what feels like, and what it gives kind of an illusion of a choice, of that it's making choice, that it's making these decisions. It's not going to be the same every time. That complexity is not something that I can definitively go over, because it's crazy. I don't know how they do it.
Well, I don't even know that they know. That's like I've heard guys talking about how they build chips, and like you're saying, they can't actually reverse engineer the decision it made. It's actually they're starting to come out with it like explaining itself too. And like in the memory it has, so it'll like remember everything about how it did what it did, and then explain the justify itself, which is crazy. But then I don't think the engineers of this know exactly like what's happening or even like necessarily how they work. Like they're having AI chips generate AI chips almost. And so It's just like it's an insane world to be like to
That is
explore.
such a crazy thought that the best way to know how it works is to ask it how it works, because we don't know.
Yeah, you got no way to check.
Yeah.
Well,
So
you-
And
crazy.
it'll
listen-
always know better than we do.
Yeah.
Listen to the guys at NVIDIA. They're like on the cutting edge of this stuff, the GPUs and the chips. Like that's what they say. They say like we ask it how to build itself and it builds itself, and then we come out with a new model. And then like they come in the next morning and they're like, oh, it figured something out. Nice.
There is an example that I think is pretty cool. It was an early one. You know those chess bots, right? That was popular for a little while. The chess bots, one of the biggest ones called Stockfish, and that was around for a while, beating any human. We're way past the point of humans generally beating robots at chess, right? The robots are now winning us at chess all the way, and it's just these different groups who are coming out with chess bots. Then Google comes out with its own AI version, and so it was called Alpha Zero. And so it went up against the best chess bot called Stockfish, and it won it. I think they played like a couple thousand games and they tied for most of them, but it won 28 and the other one won 0, which is a crazy high difference in that world. But how it did it, how they trained it, was instead of chess bots learning based on human input, manual input of showing games, right? We teach it games. This is how this person played this one. This is how this person played this. Now come up with who won the most in these scenarios. And they give them millions of scenarios and say who won in these situations and how they won. And then it can figure out the best path then to success in those. Instead of that happening, instead of man needing to be involved, they had the AI Alpha Zero play itself millions of times in a night. And so it plays itself. It has the ability then to go up against itself, do different moves, specifically try different things, millions of games, and just keep tracking who won, who won, who won. And now it's learning on itself instead of human input, right? Like that difference is massive.
Yeah, I don't think we can't wrap our head around what that even means. Like it's insane. So yeah, like I guess one other little thing, like it's really impossible to explain this, but like basically the way old chips worked is like a linear, like it's like you feeding like calculations into a calculator really fast. And like well, the most like up to date like Intel chip in your laptop or whatever has like might have 8 cores in it now. It used to not even. It used to have 1, which means like 1 calculator that everything ran through. So you have like the number of cores, which is like number of calculations it could do simultaneously, and then it had a speed, like how fast can it do it. So you can like have 1 core going really fast or 8 cores going slightly slower, and then they generate heat, so you got to like cool it off. But these things are like instead of having 8 cores, these things have like 10,000 or 100,000, and then they stack them. So you can imagine the computation that's going on simultaneously. It's like not 10x, it's like 2 million x what used to happen. So like that's why this advancement gets so fast. Like they can play, like you said, they can play 2 million chess games in an hour or something. Like whereas if you were feeding it in as a human, it would be like 2 an hour.
And so that really was, it wasn't that the technology for graphics cards specifically, I think, as much changed as that's not part of, say, they're not part of a deep learning system. What it was is it got complicated, it got fast enough. Graphics cards have become fast enough. It finally reached that tipping point that now these deep learning systems that were installed can actually run properly and effectively, right? And so that's a big thing. So NVIDIA, like obviously their stock price went massive, and GPUs are so valuable now inside of this new world. And like the fact that they were able to get over that barrier to make computing fast enough, to make the graphics cards fast enough that they needed to, is the reason why any of this is happening. And so they're still doing lots of crazy stuff. Like NVIDIA is a great one to watch right now because they've kind of got their hands in every one of the pots as well inside of what AI.
Do we want to touch
doing.
on that for a second too? Kind of this whole arms race in AI. I don't know if who wants to jump on that one, but there's definitely a number of companies jockeying for position in this emerging field.
And yeah, going off of everything we're just talking about, I think the arms race is very much tied to the hardware arms race, right? You can't talk about the AI arms race without talking about hardware. And so any advancement that's happening with AI is because of all the breakthroughs that's happening as far as chip design and things like that.
Mhm.
And so the biggest one is actually there's like a big race right now to figure out quantum computing, because that's just going to open up this whole other world of what's possible within a chip.
Yeah.
And they're basically saying, you know, we're talking about classical computing, and now we have this deep learning capabilities. The same amount of increase, if not more, is going to be made possible when we make the leap from deep learning within classical computers to quantum chips. And so it's really whoever's going to be able to figure out quantum computing is going to just open up that whole world of potentially tapping into true artificial intelligence, which they haven't achieved yet.
How do they have a name for something that they don't know what it is yet?
Quantum computing? Well, I think they like the
Yeah,
theory.
they know.
There's a theory for it, right? But yeah, they haven't. I don't.
They must know they're making them. Like, did you guys see the Willow chip that's coming up from Google? Did you guys watch that?
No.
Oh, you got to look it up. It's insane. So it's a very tiny chip. The biggest things with quantum computing right now, and obviously this does matter for AI, and like Kyle was talking about. Right now, the bottleneck is the speed in which we can do these computations. We need to go up way more than we currently are if we want to see the boosts that basically the guys inside of the industry are saying we need to see, and that a lot of that can come through from quantum computing. Essentially, Google released a Willow chip, and there's a couple very interesting things about it. It's a quantum chip. It can do in 5 minutes what would take currently the best supercomputer 10 septillion years to do. So that's the kind of differences we're talking about. It's insane. It's mind-boggling ideas here. And now some quantum chips have been able to do somewhat similar numbers. They're also insane. But the interesting thing with this one is its success rate. The biggest thing with quantum computing is because you're using more organics, it's quantum based. And so when you're working in that world, it's not as predictable. And the predictability is the thing that's been the challenge, because it only works so many times, so many amount of the times. It can happen much faster if we're using it, but we need to make the quantum realm somewhat predictable and then be able to put them in boxes and use them for data outputs. The data outputs right now for computing is ones and zeros, right? On, off, binary. That has, I believe it's 4. Instead of having an off on, it's that Schrodinger's cat thing where you can have an off switch, an on, a between, neither, and a both is the categories that these quantum elements can have. And so it can make then computations a lot faster because of that. What the biggest thing with Willow is that they created these chips to be much more consistent. They don't have the error rate that older chips used to have. And I highly recommend watching the video on it, because it's pretty incredible. And so when we attach these chips, when suddenly a quantum computing Willow chip is inside of a robot and has the power to do 10 septillion years worth of data in 5 minutes, and all of our robots have that in them, and they're connected from a neural network that's attached to these LLMs and stuff. Like there's some pretty crazy potential happening.
It's
there.
remarkable. Why don't we switch gears a little bit in application and touch on education for a second there? Because this is obviously a huge area where AI is making an impact in schools. Ty, I mean, I know you're involved locally in Calgary school there, and I'm sure you guys keep an eye on things as well. But in preparing for this episode, we were just chatting about this behind the scenes, like just how to think as humans, right? This ability to speak and to write and to formulate ideas and to be articulate. Are we at risk of losing this if kids today are just using generative AI and large language models to do a lot of their schoolwork? Maybe I'll shoot it over to Ty first.
Yeah, it's I mean, I kind of like, just when you're teeing this up, like my brain goes to two spots. One is using it in education. So what is available for kids? So using things like ChatGPT to help write essays and understand ideas and then research. But then also, what's it going to become and how do we use the tools? And so like learning that, like what we're talking about with this stuff, like, do kids need to know about this quantum computing? Do kids need to know about what's coming down? Like, a kid's going to show up at a school with a robot. What do we do with that? So I guess on the learning side, it's a challenge. I think John mentioned this in one of the chats that we were, John Dykstra. So he asked the question about learning to think, like you just said. How do you expect kids to learn to think if they generate a lot of what they generate with AI? And the answer has been more recently, like teachers helping kids understand how to learn to use these tools, because there's no avoiding it. And it's hard to defend against kids just using it. So then what does thinking mean? And I think that's kind of really changed. And as Christians, I mean, this is definitely one of the things that we should be chatting about. What does thinking mean now, even with Google? Like our memory is way smaller. We don't need to tell stories anymore to remember stuff through the generations. We just Google it. And like I see that in my kids already. It's like they ask me a question and I'm like, I don't know what the answer is. We're Googling it. And they're growing up in that world. I didn't grow up in that world. So we don't even really know what that means. And so, their kids are going to grow up in a world where you could be wearing glasses that are feeding you information live while you're having a conversation with someone. Googling what you're having a conversation about, correcting you so you're never wrong, and you could have that all through the lens of what you decide is your worldview. So you could say, I'm Reformed, and I want everything you say to reflect that, and I want you to also play as my conscience. So tell me when I'm doing something that's not good. All of this stuff is literally, with the tools they have now, is possible. It's just a matter of what Kyle was mentioning, just the hardware. And so like, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle here. It's just a matter of like, at the school board level, like what path are you taking? And a lot of people are like, let's just not do computers. It's
I heard a pretty cool opinion on this that I like quite a bit. Um, the question somebody asked is this maybe actually a symbol and a recognition of how culturally school has failed us as much as it has? Because why is it that when a kid is in school and he has an essay to do, that he would prefer to have the essay completed by a bot and not learn the information than to have to do it? It means that the reasoning for us going to school, our motivation for doing it, is because we have to get through it. Now, I thought, like my wife, she went to a directed learning school. It was a school where you basically got to make a little bit more choice about what you're doing. And she ended up in every extracurricular that there was because she learned to develop an interest in learning. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to do, because we have all of the data here, you're not going to get the information into the kids unless they want to learn that stuff. They actually want it in their minds. They don't just want it from ChatGPT to get it. What's interesting them. And because we have these systems, because we won't need, like you're saying, right? The internet's doing these things for us. I don't need to put my efforts as much into that because we do have it and it's always going to be there. It's good to learn these skills outside of that, but it's part of the reality of our work. I'm going to use it because it's available. That means that we shift the work that we do, our desires for learning, into other realms that we find valuable. And so I hope that brings actually some changes to the school systems, that we're designing things a little bit more after what's interesting, what they find valuable to learn, because they want it in their head, not because they want to see this a high grade in a specific field.
It's like in a way, schools are going to need to develop in the same way that AI has developed into this deep learning state, and it's no longer binary and if thens. The same thing's going to have to happen with students, where
Yeah.
like things become a lot more complex on like what it means to learn, and it might not necessarily be like write an essay and then because you wrote that essay I now know that you learned something. It's like things are going to have to get a lot more complex than just the if-then statements within schools.
Yeah, it was a problem before, right? Like I in grade 9, I wrote a book study on the book Holes 4 times, but I never read the book Holes because I just watched the movie, right? Like we've been getting away with this for a long time. That's a problem in our schools. That's a problem in our systems.
I did the same thing. I think I've only ever read one book. I think I read one book through my entire education. So
Yeah, but read a lot of Spark Notes.
Yeah, but you learn. But is there a distinction there between like I think we're already kind of there, where you you have Googleable knowledge, like, so you can go find something out. And then like, I even have it with little things in my life. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't remember that because like I know that I don't need to. So like even at work, like somebody has to change something on a job site. I'll solve the problem, like implement the solution, and then forget that it ever existed because I know I have a system that tracks this. If they need to like if we need to resolve this problem, I go there, find the information, and I resolve it. And so like it's more of a processing, like how to process things in your head learning than it is like I have to remember these facts. And so like you do a history class and you learn about the Second World War, like are we encouraging kids still to remember the stuff, or are we like teaching them how to think about stuff? So when you process knowledge or you have to come up with an opinion about something, you know how to do that. Like I don't know.
What is school if not preparing them for the world that they're going into, right? And so to say, oh, don't use AI because that's not allowing you to create original thought and things like that. But the reality is, once they get into the real world, all these systems are going to be in place, and it's about leveraging this technology to do certain things, right? And so that's what school should be then, is finding a way to use these to do something totally different than if, oh, we're going to pretend it's not there. It's the same thing when calculators would have first came out. Okay, are you going to make people write tests without calculators, or are you going to increase the difficulty of the tests knowing that they have these calculators? And so now we're doing more algorithmic functions and graphing parabolas on your calculators instead of just, do you know what 2 plus 2 is?
While still recognizing the importance of learning to learn, right? That's not out of the equation. There's aspects of it that we just need them to learn how to learn. And I'm sure you're still going to get, like, they're just writing tests live now instead.
Yeah.
Instead
Well,
of
and that's the
producing an essay,
emphasis
you gotta
still
write
is
live.
learning how to learn, right?
Yeah.
But what does that look like?
Well, there's a lot of like, so there's a lot of advancements in that world. Like it's kind of it's a tough spot to be in, I guess, because it's so rapidly iterating that everyone feels discouraged by if they were to like implement something that's a lot of work to like figure out how to implement in a school. They're going to be so, it's like the NASA thing. They're like, well, if we launch a satellite today, in 10 years our technology will be so good that the satellite we build then is going to pass the one now. And like, there's no point in launching this one because in 10 years we'll be way better. But like, if you don't launch it now, you don't know how to launch it later. So it's like, it feels dumb, but you kind of have to do it. But there's a lot of like, in the actual education world, there's a lot of like advancement. So even in like, I wish I should have looked this up again, but there was a program, I think it was in the UK they were using, and they took elementary school kids out of their class for like an hour a day to help them learn to read and do math and things. And they basically had AI assisting them like personally with this task. So AI learned how they learn like on each kid's individual level. And these kids, I think it was an hour a day, I think it was grade 1, grade 2, maybe they tried this. And the kids were a full year ahead of their peers because they had AI watching like, oh no, this kid's more like, he recognizes patterns in words that this kid doesn't recognize. And like that stuff, it just seems like that's just good. There's just no like, what's the downside? Your kid's learning things faster.
Right.
There is the one downside of, because yes, like custom tailored advanced personal tutors for children. That sounds awesome. That's great, and I think there's a lot more good about that than bad. The downside is that what if teachers stop teaching? Because each child has a personal teacher. Like now, maybe it might end up being a good thing and we get, better Christian homeschooling or something because AI is teaching there, and we like homeschooling might see real benefits from this. But kids at school who actually need a teacher there, and now suddenly the school realizes it can save money and just have a fully AI run school, and you hire somebody there to just make sure that the kids aren't getting into trouble or something, but that they're leaning less and less on teachers actually teaching, on communication being less in the class. I'd like to see these advanced tutors being additions, right, to what's happening now, and not subtract from what's going on, to allow that to take over more.
But on the point of education there, like talking about learning to learn, like what do you guys think about the place of memory though? Because we were just kind of chatting about that a couple minutes ago. Like I think that still matters to a degree, like the skill of learning to memorize things. just on full stop for that alone. But then also for the fact of, do we want to be in a world or in a situation where all of our, the major data, so to speak, that lived in our head at one time is now somewhere else in a cloud? Like, that's not an incredibly safe world, and that's also a world that can be tampered with very easily if that information is at all centralized or at all compromised. So, do you guys have any thoughts around that? Because to me, I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm all about using the technology, but I think we gotta be really careful about how we bring this into schools.
But I think, like, we crave to learn, right? When we crave to know stuff, we have many of us have a natural ambition to develop in knowledge in certain things. I would not feel comfortable with my theology being designed by a robot, right? I need to have a deep understanding of theology to feel comfortable with that. I desire to learn as much as I can in that field. And so again, it's just about redirecting to, we have the capacity now to not need to focus as much on learning the things that we don't really want to learn, the things that are not part of the category that interest us naturally. We're coming to a stage of human position where certain jobs, certain necessities, we have to do less because other things are taking care of it for us. And I'm not disagreeing with the point that we also need to be careful. We need to just practice memory. We should be practiced at doing those things. I think that's helpful, but I think it can be good in just directing our creativity and our desire for what we know to be more particular to what we think is valuable to just hold in our minds. And so for me, I'd love to see more people diving into theology, caring about those things, because they're focused less on things that they don't need to. Man gets to be focused more on higher things that a robot can't do for him. And hopefully that for people is God.
Yeah, dude, what's your take on that? Because that's like that's one of the, I mean, it's not quite the doomsday thing that people say, but this is kind of the people thought the same thing about the internet, like how it's going to take over people's jobs. It's not quite the end of the world with the super intelligence, like, controlling everything. We could touch on that too, but what's your take on this, like it taking over everyone's job, that fear that people have about AI, general AI, and
I mean, I think it's just a progression. So yeah, it is a reality. There will be less jobs because of it, but at the end of the day, people's jobs kind of just shift, right? The same thing, if you go back 500 years, the amount of people that are farming, if you heard about the advancements that are made in farming and now only 1% of society needs to actually farm, it's like, oh, so there's no jobs for anybody. Well, now we're creating podcasts and doing super weird things they could have never even thought of as being jobs, right? And so things will just shift. If you want to keep busy, you'll be able to do that and find different areas. Us in the creative field, yeah, it might pose a threat to graphic design, but okay, how are we going to learn how to use what AI is doing in graphic design to now implement and create products for people to consume?
Yeah, in the times that Kyle's talking about, what we saw was the entertainment industry suddenly starts, right? It booms and explodes, and now the entertainment industry is a huge industry. Now, obviously, if we weren't as sinful as we are, we would have seen that taken up by pastors, right? And more people doing God's work. And we're not picking that, and that's super sad. And I'd love to see this next stage lead into a reformation a little bit, a time of great growth in that capacity, over making jobs that are more and more useless, right? But it is interesting because it already has happened, that shift that Kyle's talking about. You take coding jobs. Coding used to be a thing. You'd have to actually code the elements and items and software. And there's tons of coding jobs. And that was some jobs that came from, we don't have as many jobs in farming and these things. Great. Now we have computers. What does that mean? Well, it means we have coding jobs. Now coding jobs are gone. Why? Because AI is here and it can write the code for us. Well, those guys aren't losing their jobs. What they're doing is becoming AI management people. They're managing AI to create code. They're learning advanced AI techniques to create bigger and better things through AI. So it's starting industries. You see stuff like what was it? Trump just started Stargate. I think he said. Do you guys see that?
Yeah.
$500 billion is being put into AI infrastructure for that. He said something like hundreds of thousands of jobs being created through that. Like there are jobs here. It's just shifting what we're doing in college, what we're preparing for.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's it's a bit of a fallacy to view, and I think that we kind of have always done this. We view like intelligent jobs on kind of like a hierarchy where you're like, yeah, okay, you've got like the not everyone can be Bezos, not everyone can be Zuckerberg. Like these guys are obviously they've got their finger on something. And then even guys who are like really technically intelligent or like surgeons who like not everyone can be a surgeon. And then that kind of like is all the way down. Oh, now we have fast food worker at the bottom. Like that's just like, why we're raising the minimum wage. That's like who we're trying to. But then it seems that like all this AI stuff lands above the highest guy on the hierarchy. But in reality, eventually everyone's so familiar with how it works, those jobs actually get pushed down in like the intelligence necessary to perform that job. Or everyone's like the intelligence around that field is so much greater that it actually doesn't take like so much extra knowledge. Like you don't need to go to university for 40 years to understand this. It's just a regular 4 year thing. Like, and then you're there. Um, I feel like that's where people are like, well, I'm never going to be able to understand this. And then like in 2 generations, like their grandkids will be like, yeah, no, like you don't understand that. Like, you're nuts. And that's how we feel about like, I feel about that about our grandparents. Like, well, you don't understand how a computer works. Like, it's like, I don't know. Like you would build one. Most people are like, if they had to build a computer, like could do it. Like they've heard the terms enough and they know how to YouTube. Perfect. Like, so yeah.
And what we're seeing is just a greater capacity, right, for what we can do, so instead of working on these things, eventually we're working on the ships that we're sending to Mars, because we're also traveling, whatever the case is. It just allows things to grow. But nobody has, like, the real problem would be if we had a famine, something like this, where we don't have the resources that we need. But as long as we are having the resources we need, and there's plenty of food, there's plenty of things for us, then the jobs we'll just create our own jobs to just cycle those things. But I see all of these advancements just leaning towards more jobs, different jobs than we have, but nobody's out of jobs and wishing for a job. And even if they were, we can handle a lot more people even not working technically, because society won't crumble, because we can do a lot more, we can grow a lot bigger. There's a lot of arguments right now for AI eventually even solving world hunger, that these are things that AI can actually kind of tackle and make a lot of the problems of the past less serious, less
Yeah,
big.
it just ramps up that productivity flywheel, right? Like if construction moves quicker, and then the tech moves quicker, and then the media people move quicker to market those firms, and everything just moves super super quick. We're just going to get a lot more done in the same amount of time, and you're going to see that prosperity flow. Um, I do, yeah. The ethics side of it though is just so interesting to grapple with, because if you think about it, like we've been making this comparison to like kind of the Google age, the internet age, whatever, and now we're in the AI timeline, but we haven't really even fully grasped what that means as far as just having the internet available in our pocket at all times, and the impact that has on our brains. Um, I think we've seen a trend over the last couple of years of people like dialing it back a little bit in terms of social media use, because that's kind of been proven, especially for younger people, younger women in particular. It's usually a pretty harmful technology for them at that kind of pivotal age in high school, and even beyond that too. There's a lot of negative downsides about that. So I'm not saying go full Amish. I'm not saying go full Mennonite or anything like that. But there is some wisdom in probably thinking about the use of like what does this tech actually do for us, and the ethical side of that. So I'm interested for your thoughts, guys, on how you kind of chew with the ethics of using a tool like AI, knowing that other tech we've kind of just accepted into our lives, and then we've had to look back and go, oh yeah, that wasn't so good. Like, is there a framework we can use? Like, I mean, obviously there's a biblical framework, but specifically, is there certain points, ethical points that we can look to say, hey, we can prevent some of the harm that could be caused by AI, or do we just have to live it and look back and say, oh, we should have done better?
Yeah, now I have three kind of in mind examples of the different industries where that is affecting us quite a bit, and that there is a real ethical dilemma that we need to think about. And so maybe on that, I guess I could just mention one of those, and we can
Sure.
deal with that ethical issue. So the first one to think about is inside of robotics for the military, right? This is something that's happening with AI. We now have AI running military bots. The US military just came out with a squad of Boston Dynamic dogs, those Boston Dynamic dogs. and they're rigged up.
Really?
Yeah, and they're rigged up with assault rifles. And as a team, and each of the dogs, they call it like a wolf pack, and each of the dogs in this 5-person squad has different weapons and different roles and responsibilities as a bit of a hive mind together to go out into the field and do stuff. And so to disconnect, emotion and care, or any human response to war, that's a very challenging idea, and it's something that's actually getting really popular inside of the military now. This isn't a future problem.
That's an interesting one because we've seen drone warfare for a while, and that's got its own. I mean, it's a similar ethical concern. I heard something where someone was saying it's less going to be, um, yeah. I mean, this is obviously it's this doomsday thing again, but like it is more about like how much robotic power you can exert, because who's going to come and fight your dog army? Like no one's no one wants to do that. Like no one's going to send out people to do that. And so they said, well, there's kind of a positive and a negative. One is the positive end is like, well, let's just fight war with robots instead, and no one needs to die. And whoever's robots win, they win, because like once you're out of robots and out of technology, you're cooked. Like you're just going to surrender, because like it's like the nuclear bomb, right? Like it's like if we threaten this, you're done. Like there is no war. Um, so I mean, obviously there's peril there, because like yeah, maybe they just don't, accept surrender. And then also maybe these things just get out of control and do what they want to do. Um, but then the other side of it's like, well, okay, are we just going to it's basically letting the United States win or China win because they're ahead. Like Somalia is not going to be like, oh, we're competing in this world. Like, it's like, so there's only two players now. Like you don't have like us, no one has sovereignty anymore. And if you accept that as like the way we're going to do this, we have two countries. Like we have the United States, how big ever they can get, and China, how big they can get. And now the whole world's just two camps, which is
Well, and the problem is too, if we actually go to war with China, if something like that happened, like that's such a bigger scale issue and desperation involved than both sides agreeing, kind of like Geneva Convention, that we're gonna only use robots for the war, and whoever wins, now you own the country or get whatever you want, right? But if we're at that scale, we're definitely involving humans. But the bigger issue is these small scale situations. Like you said, Somalia is not going to have it, but they have a civil war there, and we've agreed as the states, which is generally the situation, Canada or the states will go in and manage this. But instead of us managing it, we send in some dogs, and now we're ruling the world through robots controlling every other country, because a human's never going to go up against a dog.
The states did that in Iraq. I mean, like it's been happening. It's like a guy just outside Las Vegas is flying drones around Afghanistan and bombing these guys who don't even know what a cell phone is. Like it's like, dude, like this doesn't seem fair. And that, like, if you wanted to stop a civil war in Rwanda, you would just go in there with your dog pack and it would stop it immediately. Like who's gonna want to fight that? But like, yeah, that's a huge problem.
And yeah, that one's been there for a while, right? But another one that I find pretty interesting is in gaming. I don't know if you guys have ever played video games at all, but some pretty wild stuff is happening, and I think there's some real ethical dilemmas involved. So what we're seeing right now is there's already video games that have come out that the first step has been NPCs, so non-player characters, people in the world that you're playing, the computer bots that you find inside these worlds. Instead, they're connected to these LLMs. And so I can walk up to them, and then it's a speech to talk, and I'll talk into my mic, and then they'll respond. And the computer set them to be that character. I'm talking to the character Betty, and Betty has this information about them. Betty knows this information that I can ask them questions about. It gives them the whole life and a whole world inside of the scope of what the game has decided they should know. And so you get to have conversations with people, and then it's in a large scale that actually everyone you're talking to in a game is direct conversation. Then on top of that, we have AI text adventures that basically, as the story is progressing, as you talk to these different NPCs and say something happens to one of them and they're out of the picture, that the story can actually change and evolve over time, because the AI is running things and decides, okay, now because you did this, this affects Betty because that was Betty's husband, and Betty's husband's gone, so now this happens. And it's developing dynamics, kind of like in like a Dungeons and Dragons game or something, where somebody's controlling the elements of how it changes for the future. That's now in video games. Now, this hasn't happened yet, but what it's developing is that same thing for building assets as well for the game, that the game can actually grow physically. You can walk in a direction and it's developing assets for that world, people for it. And we have growing games that are getting bigger and bigger based on AI technology. Now, the problem we're already having is that people who are non-Christian specifically, who don't see a real difference between if life is about happiness, if life is about me feeling good, and I feel better playing this video game than my real life, then why not do the video game? The only thing that's been limiting them is the limit of the video game to feel real, like that communication, like that life is something real to them. But imagine these situations where you're having meaningful conversations with individuals in a game, that it's growing and ever expanding, that you have a character that's developing and it's a personal game to you. Like, if gaming gets bigger and complex like this, I'm worried what it does to people as it pulls them in, because to be honest, it just seems incredible. Like, what an incredible thing to get to try and see. And I think it's going to pull a lot of people in, a lot more than it has already.
And not even just gaming, like you call it gaming, but it's like the reality is, as this tech progresses, can we create a simulated reality that's indistinguishable from our own reality? And what are the ethical implications of engaging them with that reality, right? Obviously, we think that's a no-go. You don't pursue that. But for someone who doesn't have God in their life, yeah, like Dave said, what's the difference between that life then that I can put myself into and control versus the life I'm living now, where I'm unhappy and I'm unwealthy and, I'm depressed and all these things.
Dude, like you're describing the video game, and video games is like a pretty classic example of where we understand that is not worth it. Like you're like, wow, okay, but yeah, like it's not real, so it's not real. But Zuckerberg was just talking about what they're doing at Meta. And so they're trying to work on this hardware stuff too, like Meta glasses. And the big problem they've been trying to solve in like even video conferencing, like what we're doing right now. When I look at my screen, I'm not looking at my camera. I'm looking at you guys, and you're looking at like the rest of us. So our eyes are not on each other like they would be in a real conversation. And so they've been trying to solve this. Like this doesn't feel real. And even if we had a like VR glasses or goggles or whatever, it doesn't feel real. And then like things like you can't see your hands when you put them in front of you. Like that's a problem. So like it doesn't feel real to us as humans. And they're like, if we can solve all these problems, then you basically can live and it feels almost exactly the same as reality. But then you apply it to like a business context. So if you take like an AI agent, like what you have in a chat bot in a company, but instead it's a person. Like we were talking about a lawyer. So if you're a lawyer and you need to hire a paralegal to do a bunch of work for you, you just get an AI paralegal. And then instead of it just being like a chat bot that you go to, like ChatGPT, it's a person and it has a story and it's fun and you can joke around with it and it learns from you. And it's literally like what it would be like to hire somebody. And that bot, like you're saying in a video game, can sit in on a virtual meeting where you're like with 3 real people and there's 7 fake people around this. So you're literally like, you might not know which people are real in a meeting and which people aren't. You might not know, like somebody might stumble over their words and you're like, oh, that guy might be fake. And you're like, oh, maybe he's real because he's making mistakes. Like you just don't like, so he takes video conferencing to like a level that we're just like, I mean, we're not familiar with, but like ethically, you're like, are you really you then? And are you really having interactions with like people in the world? Or is it just all imaginary? Like you might literally do business with an imaginary company. Like you might have you might be getting deposed in like a car crash case and the insurance lawyer and all the team is all fake. Like they might not exist. They might not be people. Like that's
Yeah.
insane.
And this is the stuff that scares people the most.
But they can like they're like a year away from this stuff, like making it so real that you can't tell. And so like if you take it to that level.
Yeah, there is a positive outlook on that same issue. Okay. So if it becomes more and more real and that you don't actually know the difference between real and fake when it comes to digital mediums, what that actually means is because it's not that people will always just be tricked and it's like, oh man, you can't know. Oh, well, what's going to happen is I don't know. I can't have confidence that you're real. And I can't have confidence that I'm communicating with somebody. Therefore, I'm being disenfranchised with digital mediums for communication. Digital communication has tricked us with stuff like social media to think that we're engaging, and we have Twitch and stuff, and there's famous people on there, and people are texting back and forth. And it's these massive industries where you feel like you have friends because you're texting with friends to a Twitch streamer or on YouTube or on social media and posting in Facebook. We're doing all these things, and what we're getting out of it is the feeling of communication. Once we properly can't trust that that communication is genuine, then the only thing we can do is in-person meetings. And so the positive outlook, the hope with this is maybe we disenfranchise this illusion of digital communication and we get back to understanding that actually no matter how good it gets, and actually the better it gets, it'll drive me further away from it because I less know that this is real. When I do actually have just through general revelation, even an understanding and desire for real relationship.
Yeah, that's true. I think we're seeing it already with Twitter because they said like there was a study that found like in some areas 80% of the communication on Twitter is actually fake, which is like X. But I think it's the same across the board in all these big platforms. Like they're actually just bots. Like people are engaging with in conversations where bots are having communication about an issue. And so they're getting sucked into like a really compelling argumentative conversation that literally doesn't exist. And so like like maybe 20% of it's real. Like that's crazy.
Mhm. I like
Yeah.
what you're saying though, Dave. Like, especially as a sales guy, like to me, where this I see this thing going is like the people who are good at human connection, those people will succeed in an AI age. I feel like because that is going to be so sorely lacking in so many people's lives that if you can bring that to the table, that's gonna be an asset for many years to come. And it seems like back to this conversation about knowledge and where we store memory and all this kind of stuff, the knowledge worker, quote unquote, or like the skilled, like if you went to school to obtain a certain degree of knowledge, say engineering or coding or whatever, right? That is going to be less and less, I think, at least is my opinion. I think that'll be less and less valuable because we'll be able to generate more and more of that over time. Yeah.
Yeah, it is an interesting thought because generally you look at technology and it's caused us as individuals to isolate more and more
Yeah.
from those like real connections. And so that's why the thought of this exponential increase in technology is a very scary thought because there's an exponential increase then in this breaking away or isolating ourselves
Yeah.
and not partaking in like real interactions with people. But that is such a good point of, maybe it's going to be what causes the breaking point of okay, we can't actually find these connections with tech anymore.
And we see that it is possible that there is a breaking point in things, right? It's the same thing of the Reformation happening, of things moving far enough into a certain position that we go, this is enough. We're seeing that in the US right now with them getting Trump, right, and passing everything with flying colors, and they're saying there's only two genders again, right? We're seeing a shift that's actually happening in the world where, generally speaking, from any walk of life that you're going, this is too much. This is too far. We have to make a change. COVID made us make huge shifts of how we do work in business, and this might just be another thing that makes us shift. Like I think these are all problems that have been happening, and I do really think that we're going to see a area of this that it shifts for the better.
Well, I was just gonna say we got about 20 minutes left or so, and I do want to hit on like what this means for the church. But if you got a point, Ty, you can jump in if you want to.
Oh, I mean, it's a rabbit hole, but I was thinking like this is kind of one of the. David had one other ethical concern, but transhumanism to me is a huge one in this space, which is like Neuralink stuff, and I mean, it's kind of peripheral to AI technology in some ways, and in some ways it's like very connected. Um, but that's something I guess. I mean, there's probably 1,000 rabbit holes there.
Yeah, and you just take. Sorry, go ahead.
In terms of examples you could give about like ethically, I think those are a little bit more clear to people. But some of them are pretty muddy. So, but go ahead with what the point you were going to make.
It's just connecting to that is the field of science,
Hmm.
right? And what that means that we're one really interesting thing that's happening is we're using AI to treat and analyze biomedical data for giving diseases and stuff. So like blood work, the amount of information, say when you go to the doctor and he's got a blood work sheet and you're saying, what am I going to go get blood work tested from? A, B, C, D, of 50 things that are on there. And the reality is that blood work actually get a lot more data than that, that can actually be extracted from that. And now they're using AI to analyze biomedical data so that we can get all of that information instantly instead of having to have individuals do all of these different things. One big area is, say, MRIs. In MRI analysis, we're having AI being used. So instead of a doctor having to visually analyze the MRI and try to figure out the details, they're using AI to do a much deeper dive quicker into these methods. There's amazing stuff happening with protein structures, and the amount that we've known before compares to, I think there was a handful that we understood of full protein structures that then help us to understand and treat diseases. We with AI, someone just won the Nobel Prize for coming up with an AI solution for it that came up with 200 million of them in a very short span of time that we were never able to do before. And it's curing diseases, it's doing amazing things. And so ethically looking at science and what it can do from a humanitarian perspective, to figure out these things. How do we make fruit? How do we make the biggest apple and the most efficient apple possible for genetic coding and understanding? It can analyze that data and come up with better ways to do that. So science is just an interesting area as well, where it's like, oh, you know what, AI is evil. Well, the science, I can't really find, unless you guys have some examples, real negative ones. Besides that, we can also then, China can make the next COVID virus much more intense if they want to use it for evil.
Yeah, I think a lot of this gets into this AI war, which is what we like. I mean, I think people are worried about that, but like, yeah, like if someone wanted to do you harm, it's essentially how good is your AI solution to their AI problem that they're posing. And so like it's a very difficult thing to navigate. And like um I guess as Christians we're I mean we've talked like during COVID, we talked a lot on this podcast too about sphere sovereignty and stuff. And there's a very clear um well, it's very clear that the government needs to have a role in how this is going to get rolled out, and it's not clear at all that they're going to do it well or have any of our Christian values while doing it. And so it's like, yeah, these globalist organizations, like what are they deciding about how we're going to like, are we just going to be okay with you creating biotech warfare things with AI and we're going to kind of deal with it as it comes? Or are we like really going to like nail these things down so they don't become big problems? Like,
Well, and there's one other actual doomsday scenario. It's simple, but it's one that we haven't mentioned that I to me is the biggest worry. So I told you guys that the system of not knowing its choice, that we can't track it from the position from A to B, right? You need to do this, it starts here, it tracks how it's going to get there. The problem with this is before we'd know the route that it would take. Because we don't know the route it's going to take, that means stuff like this. You can say, AI, I want you to cure climate change as an issue. During that route of information, as it tries to solve it, it realizes humans are the cause, as it says online, for that. For some reason, somebody has given access to some way of killing humans to the AI. The AI system is now connected to launch codes for some
Well, they got a wolf
smart
pack.
reason. Exactly. So it has all of these assets. As we connect them and make AI more powerful and more useful to us, it just takes one person giving that model access to something that it shouldn't. And then along the route of making a decision, it makes a very bad decision. And I think we're going to see that happen. I don't think it's going to be doomsday, but I do think we're going to have examples of that coming up more and more. Some tragedies, some bad things are happening. Some person is going to give AI control over the security of their building to something, and it makes the wrong decision about how to use that security, and somebody ends up getting hurt.
that's definitely, yeah. And I think we've seen things that were unexpected. They tried to, because of the way they're iterating ChatGPT, they turned the old model off and they noticed it was trying to replicate itself. So it didn't get destroyed. And no one knew that that was going to happen. Like, so that that already just gives it, and it's a small scale thing. Like, who cares if there's a second chat GPT existing? But like, that's the thing where like it has a mind of its own, and it's not obvious that that was programmed in. One defense to this, I guess, and this kind of leads into your closer here, Lucas, is I heard someone talking about the chip design. And so you can actually buy like NVIDIA's chip, right? For your computer, and you can run it like we were talking about. It just computes faster. Um, but having personal AI working in, so all your devices say would be part of your own AI defense system. And so um, one thing they were picturing to guard against, I guess, your data being used poorly online. Um, or being taken advantage by like generative or super AI, would be to have your own AI defense, which is running things. Whenever you get asked for something, it's like, well, what are you doing with this? Um, and basically having what we would typically think of as a firewall on the internet, but having an AI firewall that's then vetting AI requests. So it might, yeah, maybe an example is like if you asked your AI agent, say you have what's that? Open Table. Is that the one for
Reservations. Yeah, yeah.
booking restaurants? Yeah, right. So if you go to Open Table and say, "Hey, I want to eat sushi tonight. I don't want to drive more than 40 clicks, and I want them to serve these two things, and I don't want it to be too spicy." They would the general like the Google search would just say, "Okay, well, here's two that are close to you. Like, good luck." Um, in AI, if everyone's restaurant had an AI bot, your Open Table would then ask every single um, restaurant in the city about these criteria. And the idea would be like it could actually know more about what you mean by spicy than you even know to give it because you asked. And so it would be interacting with like the knowledge base it has of you, but then also your AI defense system would say, "Hey, no, I'm not giving you this information." Like, and it would know more about that than we would. Like, we say spicy, and Google thinks it knows what spicy is, and for us, that means a specific thing. And maybe we're okay with sharing that information. We're not sure what we can share and what we can't. And so, like, it would literally be like a computer war
The,
in our own pocket, similar to what a firewall is, but it's very
yeah.
non-linear. It's
The
like
answer to AI is more
it's
AI
wild.
then to defend against it.
In this case, at least, well, that was the
Yeah, yeah.
hypothesis, at least.
It was the same thing
Right.
with any tech, right? Like the internet comes out and you need to find solutions for internet security because there's internet attacks now. Which
Yeah. So,
one?
so you download a firewall off the internet.
Yeah, the enemy of my
Yeah.
enemy is my friend.
Right.
Okay, so what does this mean for the church, though? Kind of in closing, and we can kind of go around the horn here, but like to me, I would posit that again, the purpose or the strength of human connection is going to be something that the church, I think, could really lean into. Not to think about it like too pragmatically or anything. Obviously, there's the core gospel message that goes through that goes out from across time, and that continues on until Christ returns. But from what the culture will be needing from us, given this application of AI and this technology, I think that importance of human connection will be the one of the primary ways so that we can reach the lost in the next coming decades. What do you guys think about that thesis?
Mhm.
What do you guys think about that thesis?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think it is an interesting one. And kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, because it's getting as far as it is, it's going to emphasize the need for that human connection so much more. But I don't think in order to do that, we discard it completely, right? I think it's important for us to recognize that it is inevitable in a lot of ways, and we shouldn't become like the Amish and just completely regress from society. And well, we need human connection, so we're going to do that over here away from all of that. But it will be very important to define that and to emphasize the need to kind of separate the two things as reality gets blurred, right? So, but as Christians, I do think it's important to almost innovate with AI and find solutions to, like, yes, there's some scary possibilities with AI, but if you take it and use it for your purposes, then you can do some great things with it. What can we do for God's glory with AI as far as, translating the Bible in ways we never have before, videos, and getting content distributed to people that haven't seen this before, right? It's how do we optimize this for the advancement of the gospel? I don't think that's just putting it away completely, because that's what it feels like we did that a little bit as Christians with the internet. It's like, oh, this is scary. I can see how this can be bad. We're not really going to use it. Oh, it's here and it's part of everyone's lives. We should probably use it to talk about our organizations and create videos and develop mind share. And it's like being in the forefront, using that technology, emphasizing the need for, human connection and what it means to actually be a human, all kind of simultaneously.
Yeah, kind of as Kyle was saying too, right? So the internet, it's not inherently good or bad. It feels like it's kind of inherently bad, and I think that's because Christians stepped away from it while the world stepped towards it. And so, of course, the internet is by large being used for negative purposes. I think we have different opportunity here to not be as scared at using it and actually trying to shift the weight of it towards useful, good purposes, towards God's glory. In that, there's many ways that we can use the internet and do. Our job is fully based on digital means, and trying to glorify God. That's the point of Faith to Film. And I think one really interesting way that I'd love to see this used is with missionaries going to unreached people groups. Just imagine the scenario of you have a language model that can learn languages and knows your language, and you take it with you to this location and you start talking to them and you teach it some basic connections of some of the words that they have. What you learn, it learns, but it can do it way faster than you do. And then because of AI voice generation, which is getting popular now, if you watch any commercial, a lot of the voices that you're hearing are just AI, because it's become that good that if you have a planned script, you can get a really authentic, high-end AI voice that includes like game artists who would be voices for that. They're selling themselves and their voices as AI bots because they have enough content to generate really accurate ones. We can use that for our videos. This can also be used now for missionaries going out into the field who need to learn this new language, and then instead of learning it over a long period of time, being the first English speaking person to also know the language of this unreached people group, they have a reference for the whole thing and can do talk back and forth, at least to get the conversation going almost instantly, very quickly, by these bots analyzing the words and the conversations that they're having, and not just being able to generate word for word, which is what we've had, but it can learn to understand the words. And that's the big problem we've had, even with our videos. In translations, you lose things because words mean different things. And Google has always been able to just give you the word for word translations, but it struggles with understanding ideas. LLMs are getting better and better at that. And so we will actually be able to translate our English understanding of theology to other languages at an unprecedented rate. And so I want to see us go heavy into that field. I want to see us using AI because it eliminates so much of the groundwork to create Christian infrastructure everywhere, where Christians can now do much bigger things. We can make much larger things and do more because AI is helping us to not have to just go, well, the big company did it and we can't catch up to the big company. Well, actually, we can all kind of make something somewhat useful quicker because our huge team is, instead of individuals who we've hired, they're robots running for us, right? And I think there's a lot of room there for Christian growth.
Just to push back on that a little bit, and I'd be curious to hear all of your guys' thoughts, but specifically, when talking about missions and going to a people group, okay, now you don't really need to learn the language. It's like, well, isn't that part of what is authentic about going in there? And it's like, wow, there's these people who came and spent years before they even talked to us about Christ learning our language. Like, how much of the impact that missionary has is tied to the time they put in to learn that language.
But the idea is that they can learn the language faster, not that it would replace them.
Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it would depend on what your goals are, but that's definitely it's a technology that's never existed and never been used. Like Wycliffe Bible translators, that's what they do. They send people there to unreached people with languages that have never been written down, languages that don't really know what the words are. And they try to write them down. So like it's the first 5 years is writing the language down, and then it's like, okay, well, let's make a Bible out of it. And the whole driving factor is the Bible, but like they're actually helping the people get everything on paper. So if they can get everything on paper in a year instead of 5, yeah, you think of the 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 exponential growth there. Yeah,
Well, and the person learning the language, the struggle for them is that they don't have a tutor. They don't have
Yeah.
anyone to tell them what the stuff means and the connections. They can't start having a conversation with someone to then start, right? It's the first steps of learning a new language that's the hardest. And I'm talking to a brick wall for the first year because I'm just figuring out some words for, I hold up a stick and it's like, what's this? And he says what a stick is. Instead, the AI is learning this very quickly. And then I have a custom tutor who's teaching me this language that then at least gets me to the point quickly that I can have a conversation and then refine my language. Then make sure that the AI is not making mistakes.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's I definitely think it's something that we should embrace where it makes sense. I mean, one thing like we just chatted about before, Lucas and I always find like what you just laid out, David, like it's really nice to lay something out like this, a use case for people, because it gets their brain working on like what can this actually do? And not a lot of people understand. They might not understand the technical behind the scenes, but they can imagine something that might be possible. And I find it's extremely hard to imagine beyond what's actually going to be possible in 5 years. Like they're literally working on the thing that you're imagining. And so like, and it's iterating so fast that it's going to exist, whether it does, if it exists now or not. Um, so one thing would be like a commentary. You could train a model to be, um, yeah, like on the one hand, David, you warned earlier about like not trusting a large language model because they have all this inherent like, garbage filtering up already. But we can break through, like as Christians, as reformed Christians, we could have a reformed ChatGPT essentially, and feed it the Bible. We could feed it the information, like we could feed it every commentary that you'd ever want to read. Yeah, the confessions, and we could say like this is how we view this, and you could essentially have a Bible study where if you're stuck, you consult like it's like consulting 10 commentaries at one time. It's just something that we don't really picture. It's like aggregating all the knowledge in a book, and then it's like if a professor did that, read all of these like the passages that have to do with like just say like Romans, the first 3 verses of Romans, and then it's like, okay, but what's the ideas of all of these people around that verse, and what does it mean?
And I think because immediately people are gonna, it's like, oh, well, that's what I'm scared of, right? Like, I shouldn't be interacting with this model as far as my study of theology or anything like that. And so it's like, what is it replacing? And the idea is, as Christians, we need to be really mindful of that going forward. Don't have these kind of large language models replacing the human interactions, but instead of, oh, I'm going to Google something about this topic, I'm just going to interact with this large language model on this topic, and it's actually going to be a lot more effective because I'm having a conversation about it. And then I'm going to take that into my Bible study that I go to and have conversations with actual humans at that point.
While recognizing two very important things that are issues right now, one being bias of it. It's, it doesn't say that it has a bias, but it definitely believes in evolution. Let me tell you that much. You say how the world created, it's not a Christian view. And so you have to you have to get it to come there, but it slips through in all kinds of ways. And so we need to recognize bias and not just to trust it. The other really big issue that we didn't talk about is hallucinations. Have you guys heard of those?
Oh yeah.
So hallucinations being a problem that they've admitted they're not sure what they're going to do about this and why it's happening, or they might know why it's happening, but they don't know how to stop it. What's happening is it's hallucinations is a nice word for it's lying. The other day I put in some data. I was trying to look for a quote from a movie, and I said, what movie has this quote? And then it gave me the quote and said, oh, it's from this movie and it's from this script, and it actually attached me to the link where it got that script. And then I went through the script and I looked, it's not in there. It doesn't exist. It just fabricated that very fake information with even a link to the resource that it lied that it got it from. And it's not true. It wasn't in there. And so then I asked the same thing to Gemini. It gave me a different movie for the same link with the same thing that it didn't actually exist in there. Both those movies, it didn't actually exist. It lied about where it was. And I told ChatGPT then, and I said, oh, I don't think that's true. I think you just lied to me. And it goes, oh, you're sure, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. Sometimes we get things wrong. But so it's not in the subjective areas that we thought it would be, that it's like, oh, that's its opinion, or it found this information online. It's actually in some areas just not giving you accurate details to the sources that it's getting it from. And that's a problem that it might stay forever and might kind of make it hard to trust it without doing your own research.
Yeah, but it's starting to they're starting to work on layers where it has to prove what it did too. And so then it would say, well, I got it from here, and you're like, no, you didn't. Like it would kind of do that work itself. Um, and even the way you use it, like so people set up like we're used to, like if we interact with ChatGPT, you ask it a question or you tell it something, it responds, and then you say something, and you can't like say something, then say something else, then expand on what you're saying, attach a link, attach a picture, and then have it respond. Like you have to like you have to put an input in, you get an output, and so then you have to respond with the output, I guess. And it responds based on its last output too, which is like a weird, like it's how conversation works. So it works really well when you're chatting with it. It doesn't work well when you're like researching, because it comes up with a fake result, and then it doesn't know it's fake, so it just continues to assume that's right. um, but people use things like they call it prompts. So you just prompt out like 10 or 15 questions in a row that then like narrow the way ChatGPT is starting to think, and then you enter the research question. And so like using stuff like that, we don't really understand how that works if you're not like an engineer doing this stuff. That's a possibility. But even to simplify the example of like maybe you don't have all the commentaries in there, but say like even a search, if you go on to is it audio sermon or something, like you go on a website that has like all the sermons, and you can search for like some pastor's sermon. Now you can say search for keyword, but you might be able to search for like, I'm really curious about this question, can you find me a sermon from somebody that answers this question, and like very specifically text like about a certain text in the Bible, or about a certain like application of a text or something like that, and then it might find somewhere where a minister mentioned it, and you can listen to the sermon. So it's finding you resources that are more helpful in a more helpful way. So maybe that's a little more simplified version of that, and a little less dangerous. But yeah, there's obviously huge potential in all sorts of areas.
Well, fellas, we can go on about this all day. I feel like there's so many rabbit holes, but this is good. Um, any final
I do have, sorry, I
any
know you're
final
about to wrap up. I have one kind of final thought, and this is something, and it's kind of how it connects to obviously our experience with this as Christians. And this was something I was thinking about. The Tower of Babel, what was wrong about the Tower of Babel? Was it that they built a building, or was it that their motivation was to, reach the heavens, right? And so I think it's the same thing can kind of apply to AI. It can be bad if our motivation is to, create consciousness and blur the lines of reality and all of these things. But if we're just looking to use it as a tool, it can be a helpful thing. The Tower of Babel on its own, we build towers all the time. They're helpful. They're useful for doing certain things. And so just like, yeah, we believe as Christians, it all ultimately everything comes down to the desires of our heart. What are our motivations for anything? And so yes, AI can be bad and scary, but it can also be good. End of the day, God's purposes will prevail. And so finding a way to use this as a tool for that to happen is something to be mindful of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't reject the technology because of who's working on it, but also don't idolize the people who are working on it because of the technology. And that's a real like, yeah, you might say Elon Musk's done a lot of good in America lately, but like he might be working on something that, and his intent is not Christian. Like he wants to go to Mars. Like think about that. He wants to link you up to a computer. Yes, it might solve somebody who has paralysis. It might reconnect some neurology. It might also turn you into a robot human. And literally like so you got to really think about the technology apart from the people, and vice versa.
Yeah, great points. Well, okay, we'll wrap it up there. But if for our listeners who are still listening at this point, I appreciate you guys listening through the whole podcast. I think we covered a ton of ground, and hopefully they found it to be you found it to be educational, and hopefully informative, and comforting too. Right? There's, like you guys have all nicely summed up. There's it's a tool. It's neither good nor bad, and there are many good uses for it, many bad uses for it, and ultimately God is in control. And yeah, we're called to go out and to find the best possible uses we can for this technology, while being wise in that path forward. So thanks again. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, you can always email us at the show at reformrealtalk@gmail.com. But yeah, until next time, this has been Real Talk. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk. In partnership with Reform Perspective, this show is created and produced by Tyler Vanderwood, Lucas Holtvloer, and Mariah Tamiga. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch the show. If you have any feedback for us or ideas for future guests or topics, please let us know. You can reach us at reformedrealtalk@gmail.com. Be sure to also follow us on social media. You can search Reformed Real Talk on any of the platforms. We should come right up. Also, leave us a review, preferably a 5-star one, on any of the podcast platforms. That would be greatly appreciated. That's all for now, folks. Keep having real talk.